What I've been talking about so far is what I think of as the what question. What do we learn about the other cultures? In other words, I've been thinking about the content of ideas and feelings and so on. But when you go into your examination, you're quite likely to get a question which is not so much about what you learn or what you think about these poems, but how they're written. And so this third area of study that I'd recommend is looking at the poems now, not just for the ideas and the feelings in them, but for the way in which they use form and language, the way in which words are chosen to suggest various things or to reveal various things, and perhaps sometimes even to think about the voice or the personality that's being created in the poem. And certainly, because this is a test of reading, the examiners will be looking for ways in which candidates can talk about the use of things like rhyme or rhythm, with examples always. And they might be looking for examples of imagery, of metaphors and similes that are used, because the focus in this sort of question will be the devices used to communicate meaning. What always works best is when people are able, in an exam, to give detail to support what they've said, picking on one word very often, not necessarily a whole sentence, but just one word which allows them to show that they've read with sensitivity and insight and examined possibilities of meaning. And sometimes it may well be a whole sentence, but if you look at Night of the Scorpion, in the anthology, the line, I think it's line 13, is written that the lanterns are throwing giant scorpion shadows on the mud-baked walls. And that expression, mud-baked, when I read it, gave me the impression that this was perhaps a primitive hut somewhere far away from civilization, something that would have been very much the same as it was hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. And yet, the poet actually wrote sun-baked walls. And if you substitute the word sun-baked, you take away all those assumptions you have that this is some sort of quaint old hut in the middle of nowhere. Because in fact, Night of the Scorpion took place in the middle of one of the most busy and bustling cities on the planet, Bombay. It always gets credit in examination when a reader is able to make a point about the words that have been chosen by a writer. But it's not enough just to quote the detail and say, there it is. You need to say something more about it. You need to say something about why you think the writer chose that detail related to purpose or related to effect. What sort of effect does that detail have? I think a useful example of the sort of detail you could quote is in Two Scavengers, where Ferlinghetti describes the woman in the Mercedes as casually coiffed. It's an interesting expression. Casual means relaxed and informal, and yet the word coiffed is deliberately chosen as a word for elaborate formality of hairdressing. And so you put together this word which suggests simplicity and naturalness, casually, and this word which is to do with very careful ornamentation. And it makes you think, she's the sort of person who's worked really hard in order to look as though she hasn't worked at it at all. So it tells you something about how important her appearance is to her. Or if you're giving an example of imagery in the same poem, you might want to look at the end of Two Scavengers, where Ferlinghetti talks about the small gulf in the high seas of this democracy. You could ask, why did he choose this metaphor? The high seas of democracy makes you think of a very vast, open area, an ocean where everything is possible, the high seas of democracy. And yet, we're looking at a small gulf in it. Now, is that small gulf chosen because it's a separate area from the high seas of democracy, or because it's a safe, secluded area within the high seas of democracy? I don't know. and Serengeti isn't available for me to ask. But you can ask the questions, and you can ask in the knowledge that there probably isn't a certain answer. But at least in asking the questions, you'd be thinking about the effects of that choice of image.